So, in 2014, Park Ranger Mike Fitz noticed how many people were watching the live streams of bears catching salmon at Katmai National Park and Reserve. Specifically, how interested people were in the heightened activity of bears preparing for winter by eating as much fish as possible. Fitz and the other rangers at Katmai began asking visitors to review before and after photos of the bears preparing for hibernation and vote for which one they thought was the fattest or had the best fat transformation. The single elimination tournament was named Fat Bear Tuesday, and the results were posted to Facebook. This March Madness of chunky bears was so popular in its first year that it was renamed Fat Bear Week, and next year it was hosted on social media for everyone to vote. But I think it's more than that. I think that Fat Bear Week is the cleverest act of public engagement I've seen from a national park and preserve in a long time. It gets the general public involved with wildlife that is both inaccessible and dangerous to access, and it does so without putting a ton of additional pressure on the park staff through volunteers and collaborations. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Katmai's history. To go all the way back to the beginning, the first people to settle in Katmai area go as far back as 3000 before Common Era. As we know them today, these were probably the Inuits, the Yupiks, and the Aleuts. The village of Katmai was established in the 1760s by Russian fur hunters, and they used the land until 1867 when they sold Alaska to the United States. They had run low on money after the Crimean War, and I guess Alaska was sort of bottom of the list to keep around. So now, American settlers are moving to Katmai, and they're fishing as well as hunting for fur-bearing animals. And this kept up until June 6th in 1912, when Nova Repta, surprise, erupted. This was the largest eruption of the 20th century, so naturally everybody left the Katmai area. But then a month later, the National Geographic Society went back to investigate the aftermath, which became known as the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. This research was proving really insightful, so President Woodrow Wilson named the valley and its surrounding area, Katmai, as a national monument in 1918. From 1920 to 1950, 7 cabins were built at the Katmai National Monument, and in 1950, the National Park Service even stationed a full-time ranger there. The National Geographic Society's publications brought Katmai to the American public's attention, and this, combined with rapid increases in transportation technology, made Katmai National Monument increasingly popular for tourism. And then in 1980, Katmai became a national park and preserve. Now, the area of Katmai that draws most of its visitors is by far Brooks Camp. The camp is set up at the mouth of Brooks River, and this river has a large salmon run every fall, so that draws huge numbers of brown bears getting ready for hibernation. So it's a perfect spot for tourists to comfortably and reliably see bears on their trip. And these bears don't quite behave like the brown bears south of Alaska, or even other Alaskan regions that don't have such an abundance of resources. More often than not, if a bear finds a salmon run, they'll protect that territory and challenge any other bears that try to get in on it. Hibernation is extremely important to bear survival, so they don't take its preparation lightly. In the fall, brown bears experience hyperphagia, which is essentially the removal of any signal telling them that they're full, so they eat as much as physically possible. Adult males will gain as much as 400 to 500 pounds, and they reach a total weight of roughly 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. And this is in anticipation of a lack of food through the winter. The bears will stop eating and drinking and instead metabolize all of that fat they built up over the fall. They barely urinate and defecate, and they almost entirely shut down their kidneys. So all of that salmon eating serves to let the bear lose fat instead of muscle and bone density while it hibernates, and that makes them healthier when they eventually wake up in the spring. Over the winter, they'll lose almost a third of their body weight in this process, and if they come out of hibernation weak, they'll have more trouble finding food and mating, and it greatly impacts their chances of survival through the next winter, when they'll have to gain a bunch of fat again. But there's so many salmon in Brooks River that the bears don't feel threatened by each other's presence, and this completely changes their social dynamics to relative coexistence, compared to the hostility from bears that are protecting a limited resource. And this unique behavior obviously draws a lot of tourists to Katmai. It's not record numbers by far, but a lot considering how remote it is. The amount of bears and the amount of people who come to Katmai specifically to see the bears presents a unique challenge to the staff of Katmai National Park. Or maybe not a unique challenge, but definitely a difficult one. Every park I've ever been to in bear territory is filled with warning signs about interacting with bears and leaving food out and hiking alone and general safety, but Katmai's bear to tourist ratio on a given day is crazy. A publication from NPS History describes the difficulty protecting the wildlife and history of Katmai while still providing enjoyment of all that it has to offer at Brooks Camp really well. It says, for those who have been in the position of managing Brooks Camp, the mandate has been more than an abstract, if not paradoxical, philosophy. The primary goal for park management over the years, as well as today, is to keep both people and bears safe. This publication goes on to basically state that it's a lot easier to control people than it is to control bears. Plus, it's just fair. The bears have been around for longer, and they need the salmon. They're not just going to look at something neat. So, the park has to put a lot of safety precautions in place, including education programs and boardwalks that visitors are not permitted to journey off of when viewing the river. But this is all pretty expensive, and it takes resources away from managing other areas of Katmai, as well as doing research and preservation efforts. So in 2012, the park found its budget stretched thin, its staff overwhelmed, and its visitors feeling constrained by strict rules. In an effort to reignite public interest in the bears and make monitoring less time-consuming, they started collaborating with Explore.org to set up live streams of Brooks River that are completely free to watch. Explore.org is a nonprofit operating cameras across the world for the sake of wildlife documentation. The 9 cameras at Katmai are operated remotely by volunteers who can pan and zoom depending on where the bears are in the river. And this was immediately a huge success. Tons of people started watching the cameras, and it sparked interest in the park, even letting people who may never be able to go to it in person experience it. And being run by a nonprofit means that the live streams run at no cost to the park, and they funnel donations directly to Katmai as well. The momentum these cameras made, as well as how convenient it is to view the bears, is ultimately how Mike Fitz was able to get Fat Bear Week off the ground so fast. People were already watching, and now they had a way to participate as well. But it gets better, because there's also bear drama. People are able to keep track of who's who on the cameras, and through the years, bears have had, comeback stories and beef with other bears. It's fascinating. 480 Otis has been the bear to beat since the beginning. He won in 2014, 2016, 2017, and 2021. He's got a very patient fishing strategy, but as he's getting older, he's getting pushed out by some of the younger up-and-coming bears like 32 Chunk, who got buff in 2023 after being kind of an underdog, until last year, when he took 747's fishing spot. And that's a big deal. 747's record weight is an estimated 1,400 pounds, and he won in 2020 and 2022. He has an unofficial nickname, by the way, Colbert, as well, because some of the park rangers thought he had a similar ear abnormality to Stephen Colbert. Some people think he's not fighting for territory because he's getting older, but others speculate that he's just too good at fishing in any given spot to see the value in fighting with 32 Chunk. And side note, if you're confused by the names and numbers, all the known bears in Katmai have identification numbers, but some have nicknames. Some of those nicknames are official, like from park rangers, and some are colloquial from frequent viewers. Whether or not it's a good thing to use nicknames is up in the air, but for the sake of clarity, I'll be using both numbers and available nicknames. I'm not actually even sure if the park rangers are currently supposed to be giving out nicknames, but I imagine it's hard not to, given how well they get to know all of them. The winner last year was 128 Grazer, who's raised 2 litters since she was identified in 2005, and she's a very defensive mama bear. She's been known to start fights with dominant adult males preemptively, rather than waiting to be provoked. And even last year, without a litter, some of the dominant males avoided her, giving her pretty much free reign of her favorite fishing spots. Another mama bear worth watching was 435 Holly, who was identified in 2007 when she was raising an injured cub, 89 Backpack, who is alive and well today. She's also been observed having adopted orphan cubs and raising them alongside her biological litters. She won Fat Bear Week in 2019, but in 2020 she was seen raising another injured cub. But this was her 5th litter, so 435 fans were confident in her cub rearing skills. Plus, it was just some porcupine quills in its paw, which, to my understanding, bears recover from, all the time. And yes, this cub is still alive and well, and unofficially known as Stinker, Holy Terror, Pistol, and Firecracker. Since then, she's been back in the running for fattest bear, but even with 5 litters, she doesn't hold the record for the most. That goes to 402, with 8. 2 other interesting characters I'll mention before wrapping up this section. 151 Walker used to be a playful little guy, but in recent years he started chasing other bears from his preferred fishing spots. And his bold moves have not been taken lightly by the other bears. 128 Grazer and 856 were known to challenge him a fair bit last year, placing him below them in the bear hierarchy, but I wouldn't discount him as a future contender for the fattest bear. And then there's also 164 Bucky Dent, who last year opted not to fight for a good fishing spot and instead founded a new one. And while he's still young and may begin to challenge other bears as he ages, he's like an innovator in Fat Bear Week. And this is all just the tip of the iceberg. There's more on explore.org, and there's also a fan wiki dedicated to the Katmai bear cams, and it is an endless, fascinating rabbit hole. It's honestly amazing to see how dedicated the contributors to this page are. I think they've documented every sighting of every bear since the cameras were set up. Actually, some people are so passionate about these fat bears, there was voter fraud in 2022. Park rangers found 9,000 fraudulent votes for 435 Holly after she closed a 6,000 vote gap between herself and 747 in just a couple hours. I mean, voter fraud for bears. But like I said, that fraud is a proof of passion. And that's a passion that wouldn't have been fostered without the bear cameras and Fat Bear Week. Katmai National Park and Preserve is a really important location for the research of wildlife and human history. I mean, Brooks River alone is an incredible place where an incredible number of brown bears gather to fish every year. I mean, there's also evidence of human civilizations from a long time ago, and the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, which was an amazing piece of research for us about volcanic eruption. And yet, most people who are interested in Brooks River will never get to see it. And the people that do have the privilege of visiting need to be so careful and so respectful of the wildlife as to not interrupt the ecosystem and safety of that important location, and to not put undue pressure on the staff, who already have a really important job. Katmai's bear cams solve these two challenges basically seamlessly. Anyone can get online and enjoy the activities at Brook River, and do so in a way that is both more engaged and less interruptive. They can even volunteer to man and monitor the cameras, and these efforts even saved a lost hiker last year, who found a camera after getting stuck in rough weather conditions. People watching the live stream were able to let the Park Service know what was happening, and the man was rescued completely unharmed. Fat Bear Week is an extension and celebration of Katmai National Park and its live streams. It's brought attention to the park and conservation efforts around it, and brought a lot more funds its way through some really fun merch and word-of-mouth advertising. I think if there's a lesson to be learned here, it's that there can be a lot more to our national parks than ecotourism for the public. And if any given national park is smart, they should take cues from this and use online spaces to get people from literally anywhere in the world excited about ecology and conservation. Right now, tourism is the only thing encouraging people to pay attention to national parks, and this probably doesn't bring much in terms of benefits. I mean, sure, they make money, but they have to hire more staff and focus on safety and well-being of these people at a higher capacity. Online spaces for people to observe and discuss and even gamify national parks are the ideal combination of hands-on for the public and hands-off for the organization. And Fat Bear Week is a pretty flexible format. I think it could be adapted to a lot of different uses. The Monterey Bay Aquarium is a great example of a similar format. They have live streams of different fish tanks and animal enclosures, and set some of their best clips to lo-fi music to put on in the background while you work. They make ad revenue and get donations, and people who can't afford it or make time to travel to it can still enjoy the aquarium. I hope I see more of this in the future. Live streams, bracket tournaments, and even just unique or collectible merchandise, and friendly, personable marketing. This has the potential to be the next step in public engagement for science and conservation.